Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I want you to do this with me. Point to your head and say, "This is how I think." Put your hand over your heart and say, "This is how I feel." Make a fist in the air and say, "This is how I do." So when I point to the objects, you will say it. Right, so in order to do, you must, and you can't do one without the other. They must always come together. Some people try to do without, and that is an exercise in futility. So this afternoon, and throughout this whole series of Faithx, I encourage you to, this is how I think, this is how I feel, this is how I do. So you're going to listen and think and feel as I present this afternoon. The topic is the virtual self navigating authentic relationships in the digital world. And I want to start with a story. I like African philosophy and African folk tales, and I want to share this story with you. It begins in a nice, quaint village, and our hero, his name is Kwame. Kwame is a master weaver, and everybody in the village loved Kwame's cloths. This is Kwame. Kwame had a very interesting thing that he will do when he weaves his cloths. He will weave into the fabric tales of bravery and tales of love and laughter. And people would wear Kwame's creations, and they will wear it with pride, and they will feel a certain connection to the stories that they embodied. However, Kwame craved for something more. He had heard about a distant, faraway village that wove cloth that was far superior to his. They were colorful, and they had stories that he never heard before. And it was Kwame's dream to get to that distant village. The name of the village was Mkavu. And so Kwame set out on his journey. When he got to the village, because he was driven by this deep ambition, he saw this bustling marketplace. And the marketplace there was filled with all kinds of webs. As a matter of fact, the fabrics were woven, and the spiders, they were magical spiders that wove these webs. And so Kwame, when he entered the village, he saw these fabrics all over. It was colorful, it was beautiful. And woven within those fabrics were fantastic, almost outlandish tales of warriors with 10 arms. Yeah, and rivers with flowing gold, and feasts that never ended. And so Kwame wanted to be such a weaver. And he wanted to be part of that world. So he approached the mighty spider wizard, Anansi. Yeah, and Anansi was a weaver of webs, the master weaver. Anansi told his stories and weaved his web, and it impressed everyone. And he showed Anansi his creation. And his creation impressed Anansi, and he admired it. And he said, "Well, okay, it's cute. And maybe your villagers, the people in your village like it, but it can't compare to the fabric in Mkavu." And because Kwame was so blinded by his desire for fame, he said, "Well, you know what? I am going to try to weave like a master weaver of Mkavu." So he spent some days weaving. And in it, he wove stories that were outlandish and fantastical. He wove stories of flying elephants. And he wove stories of talking trees. And he wove stories of invisible villages. And he set out to sell his fabric. Now, the people in Mkavu, they were impressed by Kwame's new fabric. And they said, "Wow, We need to buy that fabric because it has so much nice tales woven into it. And so they bought his fabric, and he became very popular because of his fabric. But there was one little girl by the name of Abina, and she saw Kwame's fabric. But she saw through Kwame's fabric because it was very transparent to her. Abima was able to see beyond the colors, beyond the fantastic stories, beyond the lies. And she saw it for what it was. And Abina called out Kwame because of these fabric. And she came to the fabric one day and she touched one and it just disintegrated. And below it was the true old fabric that he sold back in his home village. And Nancy wasn't too pleased. And she called Kwame to him. And he said to him, I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. Because true stories resonate. They connect us to each other and our shared experiences. And Nancy said to Kwame, a beautiful lie may attract attention, but it will not weave a lasting bond. Kwame felt corrected. So he went back to his village, and there he wove his original fabric. But he was able now to be honest. And in his fabric, he wove stories of his travels. He wove stories of his failures. He wove stories of his triumphs. And people bought his new fabric, the same old fabrics, but with honest stories. And he was able not just to show these fantastical scenes, but they were able to connect to his fabric because they reflected their own lives. What's the lesson? Kwame's journey to this mythical place, Mkavu, it represents this pull and the allure of creating a virtual self. We all have felt the need to create a virtual self that is much grander than reality, not so? And in his web of lies, he couldn't compete with the genuine stories that our online persona holds sometimes. It may be less valuable, but it lacked authenticity. It's important that we share our true selves, flaws and all, when we weave the fabric of our lives. Because those truths allow us to connect. It allows us to be on a deeper level with others. And in so doing, it weaves a stronger virtual community. That's the moral of the story. We may recognize some of these symbols because they represent to us this hyper-connected world that we live in. Text, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp. We are so connected these days. Messaging, online forums. And they have become integral parts of our lives, and I will not be one to say that I probably use these every day of my life. And you probably do too. Because they have become integral parts of our lives. But amidst this constant stream of likes and comments and curated profiles, I like that phrase, curated profiles. Curated profiles are profiles that we create from carefully selected parts of our lives. And we put them together and we present them. Remember Kwame and his fabric of lies? But people can see right through it sometimes. The crucial question we want to ask ourselves is, how do we foster genuine connections, because that's the concern this afternoon, how we could foster genuine connections in this digital age. And that's what we want to explore. So go back with me to the caves of Toulon, France. And in those caves, there were drawings on the walls. And those were stories that were being told. Because humans are storytellers. Not so? We love stories. We love to hear a good story, and we love to tell a good story. As a matter of fact, long ago, when you were telling a lie, what they say you were telling? A story. And so we're good storytellers because we're that kind of creatures. And since the dawn of time, since creation, we have shaped and we have shared our stories. Think back to your old relative. My great aunt was the matriarch of our family for a while, and she will tell these stories. And those stories will connect us to her and connect us to the past. She also shared knowledge. And so those stories were truthful. Sometimes she embellished, but the stories did a connection. Social media is doing just that in the 21st century. It's creating stories. So we're moving from the caves to online. So our social media posts are actually those imprint of ourselves that we leave for others to come and see when they come behind. How do we navigate that? But the rise of the virtual self. Imagine you are walking through a virtual room, and that presence that you leave, that is your virtual self. It's a curated version of who we are. Sometimes they may contain the truth, and sometimes it's full of lies. I have a friend, his Facebook profile, his Instagram profile is very interesting, very exciting. But he's one of the most boring people I know in real. His curated self. It may or may not reflect our true identity. And it is, in fact, influenced by the trends in social media. And along with that, it's influenced by our desire for approval. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be liked. And the funny thing is, people yearn for likes more than they yearn for love. And so, the true love that you can find when you're honest, we miss out on it because we're looking for likes. So that's the rise of the virtual self. Think about who you are online and the persona that you have curated and that you have projected for the world to see. Now, we just heard this story of Kwame. And this Kwame's story is a cautionary tale for us. Of course, it's inspired by West African folklore. And Anansi is very familiar to many of us above a certain age because our parents, when we were telling a tall tale or a story that was almost unbelievable, what did they call it? A Nancy story. But Nancy's stories had depth and they had messages for us. And if we listen, we will hear them. So here's Kwame seeking fame. And he's seeking fame in this digital marketplace of Mkavu. And Mkavu, by the way, is a Swahili word that means dry. I'm not suggesting that Facebook, Instagram, or any of the social media platforms are dry places, but we sometimes seek approval in the wrong place. And there was Kwame seeking that approval in a dry place. And his web of lies begins to unravel. And it revealed to me the real importance of authenticity. We must be authentic in order to navigate the digital world. In 2004, the University of Ohio conducted a study among third-year students. And the study was to come up with, or to reveal to the researchers the kinds of relationships and the quality of relationships people have, these students have. And the findings to that survey, that study, revealed that people cherish you when you are your true self. And not just that, when you are true to yourself. And they coined the phrase dispositional authenticity. And that just simply means be true to yourself. Understand who you are and live your authentic lives. So, what can we do to step back into this real world? Because many of us have been so caught up in the web of Encarvo that the real world seems a distant place for us. So we have to understand the importance of face-to-face connections. It's very important to connect face-to-face. Relationships thrive on face-to-face connections. Relationships die when you don't connect face-to-face. You may think face-to-screen is face-to-face, as Zoom has tried to convince us, but there's nothing like face-to-face connection. Because you need to see verbal cues. You need to hear verbal cues and the non-verbal ones as well. You need to reach the point where your experiences are shared. And the face-to-face connection gives us emotional depth. Trust is important in every relationship. It's important to trust. And we cannot trust someone who we don't know and who's lying to us. And we cannot be trusted if we ourselves don't plan to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is one of the key factors in trust. If you cannot be open and honest to me and be vulnerable, then how can I trust you? So we need to step back into the real world. And I just have 3 tips as to how we can cultivate this authenticity in the digital world. First of all, be mindful of what you share online. Now, you've heard this counsel before, but you still share nonsense online. You've heard the counsel before, but you still lie online. You've heard the counsel before, and you still curate a perfect self online. This afternoon, I want to say to you that one of the ways that you can create this authenticity in the digital space is to be mindful of what you share online. Another way you can create that authenticity is to showcase your passions and your interests online. Your passions and your interests. Have you ever seen how commercials are made? Especially those with food? The rubber and glue and tar and other non-edible things that are used to create a facade of fresh and healthy and wholesome. As a matter of fact, the things that are used online to create commercials, for food especially, are not even edible. But we see it and we long for the real thing. Showcase your passions and your interests. And there may just be someone who has the same passions and the same interests, and you can connect. Use social media to connect. Social media is a tool of connection and not an arena for competition. It is a space where you connect honestly and not compete. Don't use social media for competition. Let's step back from that and begin to use it for true connection. So what do I conclude? Our digital stories matter. So we're talking about navigating our authentic selves and authentically navigating the digital world. I would say authenticity is the key to building lasting connections. When you are true to yourself and you're honest with others, the connections last. Share your true selves, your vulnerabilities and all, because vulnerabilities breed connection. We know the story of David and Goliath. And there's David in the first shot, all decked out to face the world. But what he was wearing wasn't his true self. It looked good, but it was heavy and cumbersome and unreal. As a matter of fact, to David it was unnatural. It was only when David stripped and stepped out as his true self in God did he defeat the giant. So your true selves is found in God. Step out as your true selves Be authentic as you can. And that way you can defeat the digital space. This is how I think. Say it with me. This is how I feel. This is how I do. Thank you.